You think you know the House of Hanover? Think again. What if I told you that some of their most fascinating stories, the ones that truly shaped European royalty, have been completely erased from the history books? Welcome to my channel Words of Time, and prepare to uncover the forgotten branches of this powerful dynasty. Stories so captivating they'll make you question everything you thought you knew about their legacy. The story of the House of Hanover is one of ambition, politics, and legacy, rooted in both German principalities and British power. It began in the heart of Europe, in the electorate of Brunswick-Lüneburg, commonly known as Hanover. What started as a relatively modest German noble family evolved into a royal dynasty that would rule Great Britain and later the United Kingdom for more than a century. Their rise was shaped by wars of succession, religious divisions, and the complexities of European alliances. When the Hanoverians ascended the British throne, they carried with them a blend of continental pragmatism and British constitutional evolution that would define modern monarchy. Yet beneath the grand facade of royal portraits and public image lies a sprawling web of heirs, dukes, and forgotten claimants whose stories tell as much about the monarchy's survival as those of the kings and queens who wore the crown. The origins of Hanover's rise trace back to the 30 Years' War, when the German principalities were constantly shifting alliances to survive. The family of Brunswick-Lüneburg, from which the Hanoverians descended, managed to secure both wealth and influence through calculated marriages and political loyalty to the Holy Roman Emperor. By the 17th century, they had become electors, meaning they had the right to help choose the emperor, a position that brought prestige and leverage. This same family would later use those connections to claim one of the greatest prizes in Europe, the British crown. The link between Hanover and Britain was born from religious and political necessity. After the turmoil of the English Civil War and the Glorious Revolution, Britain was determined never to return to Catholic rule. The Act of Settlement of 1701 ensured that only a Protestant heir could inherit the throne. This meant that when Queen Anne died without surviving children, the crown would have to pass through a distant but Protestant relative. That relative was Electress Sophia of Hanover, granddaughter of King James VI, and through his daughter Elizabeth Stuart. Though Sophia herself died shortly before Anne, her son, George Louis, Elector of Hanover, became King George I of Great Britain in 1714. His accession marked the beginning of the Hanoverian dynasty. George I was not a man of charisma or public charm. He spoke little English, preferred his German advisors, and often appeared aloof to his British subjects. Yet his reign laid the groundwork for a new kind of monarchy. Political power began to shift decisively toward Parliament, and the role of the monarch became more constitutional. George relied heavily on ministers like Robert Walpole, often regarded as Britain's first prime minister. This transformation allowed the monarchy to adapt to modern governance while maintaining its prestige. George's rule also tied Britain more closely to European affairs. His continuing role as Elector of Hanover meant Britain was drawn into continental conflicts, balancing the need to protect Hanover with the desire to expand British influence overseas. His son, George II, inherited both the crown and his father's divided legacy. Like his father, he was born and raised in Germany, but unlike him, he worked harder to engage with his British subjects. He participated personally in military campaigns, notably at the Battle of Dettingen, the last time a British monarch led troops in battle. His reign saw Britain's power expand through trade and colonization, as well as internal political stability under Walpole's long administration. George II's era also witnessed the beginnings of cultural transformation, with London emerging as a center of art, literature, and intellectual life. However, his personal relationships were fraught with tension. His marriage to Queen Caroline was one of deep mutual respect, but his relationship with his son, Frederick, Prince of Wales, was filled with hostility. That family conflict would echo through the generations, becoming a recurring feature of the Hanoverian line. When George II died in 1760, his grandson became George III. Unlike his predecessors, George III was born in Britain, spoke English as his first language, and identified fully as British. He sought to strengthen the moral and political authority of the monarchy, seeing himself as a devoted servant of the nation. His reign, however, was marked by some of the most challenging events in British history. The American Revolution cost Britain its colonies across the Atlantic, an enormous blow to imperial pride. Yet at home, George III presided over a period of agricultural and industrial transformation, with scientific advances and social change reshaping society. He was a patron of the arts and sciences, supported moral reform, and valued family life. However, his later years were overshadowed by mental illness, leading to the regency of his son, the future George IV. George IV, as Prince Regent and later king, embodied a very different royal image. Where his father had been dutiful and earnest, George IV was extravagant, cultured, and self-indulgent. He transformed British architecture and fashion, leaving behind landmarks like the Royal Pavilion in Brighton and contributing to the development of Regent Street and Regent's Park. But his personal life was scandalous, his marriage to Caroline of Brunswick disastrous, and his political influence limited. His reign reflected a monarchy caught between public duty and personal excess, a tension that defined much of the 19th century. After George IV came his brother, William IV, whose reign was short but significant. He presided over major political reforms, including the Reform Act of 1832, which began expanding voting rights and reshaping parliamentary representation. He had no legitimate heirs, and upon his death in 1837, the crown passed to his niece, Queen Victoria. With her ascension, the Hanoverian dynasty reached its zenith in British history. Victoria reigned for more than 60 years, becoming an enduring symbol of stability and moral authority during an era of empire and industrial progress. However, her inheritance revealed a split in the family's fortunes. Due to Hanoverian succession laws that forbade female inheritance, the Hanoverian crown passed to her uncle, Ernest Augustus, Duke of Cumberland, who became King of Hanover. This divided the British and Hanoverian thrones for the first time since 1714, though their shared lineage continued to shape both nations. Victoria's reign transformed the monarchy into a modern institution. She and her husband, Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, redefined royal domesticity, presenting themselves as a moral family devoted to duty. Their numerous children married into royal houses across Europe, earning Victoria the title Grandmother of Europe. Yet, as the generations spread across the continent, their stories grew more complex. Some descendants ruled over great empires. Others fell victim to revolutions and wars that swept away old monarchies. Within the broader Hanoverian family, lesser-known branches, such as the Dukes of Cumberland and Teviotdale, the Princes of Hanover, and other lines connected by marriage continued to play quiet but influential roles in European aristocracy. The Dukes of Cumberland, for instance, represented one of the most direct yet controversial offshoots of the Hanoverian dynasty. Prince Ernest Augustus, the fifth son of George III, became Duke of Cumberland and later King of Hanover when Victoria could not inherit that title. He was a deeply conservative ruler, committed to restoring royal authority and resisting liberal reforms. His reputation in Britain was marred by scandal and suspicion, but in Hanover, he established a stable and independent rule. His son, George V of Hanover, faced a tragic fate when the kingdom was annexed by Prussia after the Austro-Prussian War of 1866. The Hanoverian royal family lost their throne, but they retained their titles and estates, continuing to live as prominent but displaced royalty. Even in exile, they upheld their heritage, maintaining claims and traditions long after political power had faded. The title Duke of Cumberland and Teviotdale, originally granted to Prince Ernest Augustus, also became a symbol of the complex identity of the Hanoverian heirs. While some members of this branch remained loyal to their German roots, others cultivated close ties with Britain. The title itself became politically sensitive during World War I, when anti-German sentiment led the British government to suspend it under the Titles Deprivation Act of 1917. Despite this, the family maintained its presence in European noble circles, intermarrying with other dynasties and preserving their connection to the British royal line through blood, if not title. Beyond the familiar monarchs, the Hanoverian family tree extends into a labyrinth of connections. The descendants of George III alone number in the hundreds, spreading across Europe into houses such as Hesse, Battenberg, Saxe-Coburg, and Gotha, and others. Some played roles in major historical events. For example, Prince Ernest Augustus, Duke of Cumberland's descendants became involved in German politics and military life. Others married into Russian, Danish, and Greek royalty, further blending the Hanoverian bloodline into Europe's royal fabric. This intricate network of alliances underscores how dynastic marriages shaped Europe for centuries, often linking nations through family even when they stood on opposite sides of conflict. The public memory of the Hanoverians, however, tends to focus on only a handful of figures: George III's struggles, George IV's extravagance, and Victoria's enduring reign. This narrow focus hides a wealth of lesser-known stories. Some heirs never ruled but influenced diplomacy, science, and culture behind the scenes. Princess Augusta of Cambridge, for instance, was a granddaughter of George III who married into the German royal house of Mecklenburg-Strelitz. Her descendants still play roles in modern European nobility. Similarly, the younger sons and daughters of George II and George III formed branches that intertwined with continental aristocracy, shaping local politics and traditions outside the British spotlight. The Hanoverian dynasty also produced figures who lived in relative obscurity compared to their royal cousins. After the annexation of Hanover, the exiled royal family settled in Austria and later in various parts of Europe. They continued to claim their royal heritage, using titles like Prince of Hanover, even as the political landscape around them changed. In the 20th century, Ernest Augustus, a later Prince of Hanover, married Princess Victoria Louise of Prussia, daughter of Kaiser Wilhelm II, uniting two of Europe's most historic dynasties. Their descendants remain part of European aristocracy today, representing a living link between Britain's Hanoverian past and Germany's imperial history. The persistence of these family lines reflects the deep roots of the Hanoverian legacy. Although the main British monarchy moved on to become the House of Windsor in the early 20th century, the bloodline remained Hanoverian in origin. When King George V of Britain changed the family name from Saxe-Coburg and Gotha to Windsor during World War I, it was a symbolic act of patriotism, distancing the royal family from its German associations. Yet, beneath the new name, the lineage still traced back to the same ancestors who had crossed from Hanover in 1714. The modern British monarchy, from Elizabeth II to Charles III, continues that genetic and historical thread, though the political identity of the crown has evolved beyond its continental roots. Exploring the wider Hanoverian family reveals the hidden complexity behind the familiar royal narrative. Many descendants pursued military careers, served as diplomats, or managed estates across Europe. Some embraced reform and modernization. Others clung to traditional monarchism long after it had lost practical power. Their lives illustrate how monarchy, while often seen as static and ceremonial, has always been adaptive and deeply human. The divisions, alliances, and rivalries among the Hanoverian heirs mirrored those of the nations they represented, making their private lives inseparable from the broader history of Europe. The question of why only a few of these figures are remembered speaks to how history tends to focus on visible power. Monarchs who reigned, who signed treaties or declared wars, naturally dominate the record. Those who married into minor courts or lived quietly on estates in Austria or Germany faded from view. Yet their stories are no less significant for understanding how royal families maintained influence through marriage, wealth, and tradition even after losing political control. The Hanoverian heirs who did not wear crowns often wielded soft power, shaping culture, diplomacy, and the aristocratic networks that underpinned European society. There is also a cultural aspect to this selective remembrance. In Britain, the Hanoverians were at first viewed as foreign rulers, gradually accepted as British through time and circumstance. The early kings' limited command of English and their attachment to Hanover made them targets of satire and criticism. Over time, as the monarchy became more domestic and symbolic under Victoria, the narrative focused on her as the embodiment of British identity, pushing the earlier continental story into the background. The less glamorous or politically active members of the family never fit easily into that national narrative, so they became footnotes in history rather than central figures. Even so, the Hanoverian influence on the shape of modern monarchy is profound. The shift toward constitutional rule, the development of parliamentary government, and the emphasis on moral respectability all have roots in their reigns. Their blend of German efficiency and British sensibility created a model of monarchy that could endure social change. The family's adaptability allowed them to survive revolutions, wars, and shifting public opinion. From the 18th century to today, their descendants continue to occupy ceremonial and symbolic roles, embodying continuity in an ever-changing world. Beneath the surface of familiar royal history lies a network of individuals whose lives tell the fuller story of the House of Hanover. Their journeys took them from the palaces of London to the estates of Lower Saxony, from the courts of Europe to quiet exile. Some fought for lost thrones. Others built new identities within changing nations. Their stories remind us that monarchy is more than a succession of rulers. It is a living organism of people, families, and legacies intertwined across centuries. The grandeur of the Hanoverian dynasty rests not only in its crowns and palaces, but also in its endurance through generations who, whether known or forgotten, carried forward a shared heritage that still shapes the face of modern royalty. The story of the Hanoverian dynasty stretches far beyond the familiar British monarchs who wore the crown in London. When the throne of Hanover passed away from Queen Victoria due to the laws forbidding female succession, it created an enduring branch of royalty that remained deeply rooted in German soil. This line, descending from Ernest Augustus, son of King George III, carried the same royal blood but lived a very different destiny. Their world was shaped by the forces of German unification, the fall of monarchies, and the struggles of identity between their British heritage and their German homeland. These princes, dukes, and princesses were heirs not just to a name, but to a complex web of loyalty, pride, and resilience. Their stories, though rarely told, reveal the full depth of the Hanoverian legacy, showing how it extended far beyond the British Isles into the shifting heart of continental Europe. Ernest Augustus, Duke of Cumberland and later King of Hanover, was the fifth son of King George III and Queen Charlotte. Unlike his brothers, who stayed close to Britain, Ernest found his fate tied to the German half of his family's inheritance. When Queen Victoria became monarch of Britain in 1837, the Hanoverian succession laws, based on the Salic principle, barred her from inheriting the Hanoverian throne because she was a woman. The crown of Hanover therefore passed to Ernest, making him King Ernest Augustus I of Hanover. His reign marked a new chapter for the dynasty, one defined by both independence and conflict. Ernest Augustus was known for his conservative beliefs and unyielding sense of royal authority. He opposed many of the liberal movements sweeping across Europe, believing that monarchy should remain absolute and divinely guided. His firm rule earned him both respect and resentment among his people. In Hanover, he reversed some of the liberal reforms that had been enacted under his predecessors, arguing that they weakened the crown and endangered the social order. This made him a polarizing figure, admired for his strength but criticized for his resistance to progress. Yet his devotion to his kingdom was unquestionable. He saw himself as a guardian of Hanover's sovereignty, especially as neighboring Prussia began to expand its influence across the German states. His marriage to Frederica of Mecklenburg-Strelitz was equally notable. Frederica was a woman of intelligence and charm who had been married twice before, both times widowed. Her marriage to Ernest Augustus brought renewed vitality to the Hanoverian court. She became Queen of Hanover and shared her husband's deep sense of duty to the throne. Their union produced one son, George, who would succeed his father as George V of Hanover. Frederica's position as both a German and British princess made her a vital link between the two worlds, though she often faced suspicion in Britain, where her past marriages had stirred gossip. In Hanover, however, she was celebrated as a queen of compassion and strength, especially during times of political turmoil. When Ernest Augustus died in 1851, his only son, George V, ascended the throne. George was born in Britain and had spent much of his early life there, but he was deeply committed to the Hanoverian cause. He became known for his strong will and dignity, qualities that would be tested by the rising power of Prussia. George had been blinded in one eye in childhood and later lost sight in the other, but his disability did not diminish his determination. His reign was defined by conflict with Prussia and the struggle to preserve Hanover's independence during a time when Otto von Bismarck sought to unify the German states under Prussian leadership. The crisis came in 1866, when the Austro-Prussian War broke out. Hanover sided with Austria, believing that Prussian dominance threatened its sovereignty. The decision proved disastrous. Prussia's swift victory led to the annexation of Hanover, stripping George V of his throne. He was forced into exile, first in Austria and then in France, but he refused to renounce his claim. His dignity in defeat earned him respect among other European monarchs, even as his kingdom ceased to exist. George continued to style himself as King of Hanover, maintaining a small court in exile and holding fast to his belief that divine right could not be erased by conquest. His loyalty to his people and his cause became legendary among royalists who mourned the decline of smaller German kingdoms. George V's exile marked the beginning of a long period of displacement for the Hanoverian royal family. His son, Ernest Augustus, Duke of Cumberland and Teviotdale, inherited not only his father's titles, but also his unfulfilled claim to the Hanoverian throne. Despite the loss of their kingdom, the family retained immense wealth and prestige. They owned estates in Austria and maintained connections with many European royal houses. Yet, their relationship with Britain grew increasingly strained. The political atmosphere of the late 19th and early 20th centuries made their dual identity difficult. They were both descendants of British kings and loyal subjects of the German Empire, a contradiction that became impossible to maintain as nationalism intensified. This tension reached its peak during the First World War. The Hanoverian princes, though related by blood to the British royal family, were considered enemies because of their allegiance to Germany. The British government, seeking to distance the monarchy from its German ties, passed the Titles Deprivation Act in 1917, stripping several German-based royals of their British titles, including the Duke of Cumberland and Teviotdale. It was a symbolic act that underscored how deeply politics had divided the once unified Hanoverian line. Despite this, the family continued to be respected in German aristocratic circles. They had become symbols of a lost era, representing the values of loyalty, tradition, and royal honor. Among the most fascinating members of this branch was Prince George of Hanover, a grandson of George V. Born in the late 19th century, Prince George grew up amid the tension between royal pride and political change. He served in the German army and witnessed firsthand the collapse of the old order after the First World War. When the German monarchies were abolished in 1918, the Hanoverian princes lost their official powers but retained their titles socially. Prince George, like many of his relatives, adapted to this new reality by managing family estates and engaging in charitable and cultural activities. Despite the loss of political authority, the Hanoverian name still carried weight in Germany, especially among those nostalgic for the pre-war aristocratic tradition. His sister, Princess Frederica of Hanover, brought renewed visibility to the family when she married King Paul of Greece. As Queen Frederica of Greece, she played a central role in European royal affairs in the mid-20th century. Her reign was marked by both admiration and controversy. She was seen as a symbol of dignity and tradition during Greece's turbulent political years, but her assertive nature often drew criticism from Republican circles. She was deeply devoted to the idea of monarchy as a stabilizing institution and worked tirelessly to modernize its image. Her marriage united the Hanoverian legacy with that of the Greek royal family, linking her descendants to several European thrones. Her son, King Constantine II of Greece, and her daughter, Queen Sofia of Spain, carried that legacy into the modern era, demonstrating how the bloodline of the Hanoverians continued to influence European royalty long after their original kingdom had vanished. Within Germany, the Hanoverian princes continued to navigate their identity carefully. Prince Ernest Augustus, a descendant of the exiled royal family, married Princess Victoria Louise of Prussia, the daughter of Kaiser Wilhelm II, in 1913. This marriage was seen as a symbolic union between two great dynasties, the Hanoverians and the Hohenzollerns, whose ancestors had once been bitter rivals. The wedding, attended by royalty from across Europe, was one of the last great gatherings of European monarchs before the First World War. It represented a moment of unity in a continent soon to be torn apart by conflict. The marriage itself was a strong one, and their family became an important bridge between former royal houses in post-monarchic Europe. Prince Ernest Augustus and Princess Victoria Louise's descendants continued to play quiet but significant roles in European high society. Their son, also named Ernest Augustus, maintained the family's estates and became a respected figure in German aristocratic circles. The Hanoverians managed to preserve their wealth and influence despite losing their political authority. They became patrons of the arts, education, and social causes, adapting to modern realities while retaining their royal identity. Their ability to endure through political upheaval reflected the resilience that had defined the family since the days of George I. The modern generation of the Hanoverian family includes figures such as Prince Ernest Augustus of Hanover, born in the mid-20th century, and his children, including Prince Christian and Princess Caroline of Hanover. Their lives illustrate how the family has remained relevant in a changing world. Prince Ernest Augustus became well known in Germany for his strong personality and for his high-profile marriage to Princess Caroline of Monaco, daughter of Prince Rainier III and Grace Kelly. This union brought the Hanoverian lineage into the spotlight once more, linking it with one of Europe's most glamorous and enduring royal families. Princess Caroline, already a prominent figure in European culture, added further prestige to the family, blending the history of Hanover with the modern appeal of Monaco. Their son, Prince Christian of Hanover, represents the continuation of the dynasty in the 21st century. Although the Hanoverians no longer hold political power, they remain symbols of Europe's intertwined royal heritage. Prince Christian's marriage to Alexandra de Osma, a Peruvian lawyer and fashion designer, demonstrates the global reach of what was once a purely European dynasty. This modern generation of Hanoverians has embraced contemporary life while maintaining a strong sense of their ancestry. They participate in public and charitable life, bridging the past and present in ways that reflect both tradition and adaptation. Behind these modern connections lies a deep and often dramatic history of rivalries, especially between the Hanoverians and the Prussians. The annexation of Hanover in 1866 created long-lasting bitterness between the two houses. The Hanoverians viewed the Prussian conquest as an act of injustice, while the Prussians saw it as a necessary step toward German unification. Even after the fall of their kingdom, the Hanoverian royal family refused to acknowledge Prussian authority for many years. The marriage between Prince Ernest Augustus and Princess Victoria Louise of Prussia in 1913 symbolically healed this rift, but the memory of lost sovereignty lingered. It was a reminder that even within the shared fabric of royalty, politics could divide families for generations. The Hanoverian story is filled with contrasts between loyalty and loss, pride and adaptation, tradition and modernity. From Ernest Augustus's fight to preserve his crown to his descendants' efforts to maintain relevance in a world without monarchies, their journey reflects the broader evolution of European royalty. Their influence extended far beyond their borders, shaping alliances, marriages, and political decisions across the continent. They were witnesses to the rise and fall of empires, the birth of nations, and the transformation of monarchy itself from a ruling institution to a symbolic heritage. The lesser-known dukes and princesses of Hanover may not appear in most history books, but their lives illuminate the human side of royalty. They endured exile, rebuilt fortunes, and maintained dignity through generations of change. Their palaces became homes rather than courts, their titles symbols of history rather than authority. Yet their presence in modern Europe is still felt. Through marriages and descendants, they are connected to nearly every royal house on the continent. Their bloodline runs through the courts of Spain, Greece, and Monaco, as well as the British royal family itself. The story of the Hanoverian dukes and princesses is not one of decline, but of transformation. Stripped of their crowns, they adapted to new roles as private citizens, patrons, and cultural figures. They kept alive the traditions of their forebears while embracing the realities of the modern world. Their legacy lies not in the power they lost, but in the continuity they preserved. From the proud defiance of King George V of Hanover to the cosmopolitan grace of Princess Caroline and Prince Christian today, the spirit of the House of Hanover endures, quietly, perhaps, but unmistakably. They remain a living link between the grandeur of the past and the evolving identity of royalty in the present, carrying forward a name that, though often overlooked, helped shape the very idea of monarchy in Europe. The Hanoverian story did not end with the loss of the Kingdom of Hanover or the decline of their political power. Instead, it unfolded across Europe through a remarkable series of marriages, alliances, and quiet influences that reached far beyond the borders of Germany and Britain. When the direct rule of Hanover was absorbed into Prussia, the family turned its focus to preserving legacy through kinship and diplomacy. From the 18th century onward, the Hanoverian bloodline spread through the great houses of Europe, weaving connections that shaped politics, culture, and even the conflicts that would later define the modern age. What began as a German dynasty that inherited the British throne evolved into a network of royal relatives who stood behind some of the most significant turning points in European history. Their influence was subtle, often hidden behind formal portraits and arranged unions, yet their impact endured through generations. Among the earliest examples of this extended reach was Princess Augusta Sophia, one of the daughters of King George III and Queen Charlotte. Though she never married, her position in the family placed her at the center of Europe's royal circles. She was a close confidant to several of her siblings who did marry into other royal houses, and her friendships and correspondence linked her to courts in Prussia, Denmark, and the Netherlands. Augusta Sophia embodied the refined but restrained life of a Hanoverian princess, educated, devout, and conscious of her duty to the family's reputation. Her quiet role may seem minor compared to her brothers who reigned, but she represented the moral and social foundation of the dynasty. Through her influence within the royal household and her connections across the continent, she helped maintain the Hanoverian image of stability and virtue, which in turn made her relatives desirable matches for other royal families seeking legitimacy and alliance. Marriage was the most powerful instrument of diplomacy in this era, and the Hanoverians used it with care. As descendants of both British and German nobility, they possessed a unique dual identity that made them valuable partners for other royal houses seeking to strengthen ties between nations. One of the most notable unions came generations later, when Ernest Augustus, Duke of Brunswick and Prince of Hanover, married Princess Victoria Louise of Prussia, daughter of Kaiser Wilhelm II. Their marriage in the early 20th century was not merely a romantic event, but a major political gesture. It brought together two dynasties that had once been bitter rivals, the Hanoverians, whose kingdom had been annexed by Prussia, and the Hohenzollerns, who ruled the German Empire. The wedding symbolized reconciliation and unity within the German aristocracy, suggesting that old wounds could be healed through shared heritage and mutual respect. This wedding was one of the last great gatherings of European royalty before the world descended into war. Kings, queens, and princes from across the continent attended, including representatives from Britain, Russia, Greece, and Denmark. The event was celebrated as a testament to the enduring bonds between Europe's royal families, yet beneath the elegance and ceremony lay the tension of impending conflict. Many of those present would soon find themselves on opposing sides in the First World War. The marriage of Ernest Augustus and Victoria Louise thus stood as both a moment of unity and a symbol of the fragile nature of royal diplomacy. It showed how the Hanoverians, through their marriages, had become intertwined with nearly every major royal house in Europe, their influence reaching from London to Berlin, from Athens to Madrid. Ernest Augustus and Victoria Louise's marriage also produced lasting cultural consequences. As the only daughter of the German emperor, Victoria Louise brought with her the prestige of the Prussian court, known for its discipline and military tradition. The Hanoverians, by contrast, were associated with a more genteel, British-influenced style of governance and culture. Their union reflected a merging of these traditions, influencing how aristocratic life developed in northern Germany during the early 20th century. Their descendants would grow up in a world where the old imperial grandeur coexisted uneasily with the realities of modern politics, a contrast that mirrored the fate of Europe's monarchies themselves. The spread of the Hanoverian bloodline did not stop with the German states. Through generations of intermarriage, they became linked to almost every royal family on the continent. Princess Mary, another daughter of George III, married her cousin, Prince William Frederick, Duke of Gloucester and Edinburgh, maintaining close ties within Britain but also keeping strong connections to European courts. Her descendants moved in the same circles as the Dutch and Belgian royals, creating informal alliances that influenced trade and diplomacy. Princess Sophia, one of the younger daughters, was connected to several German houses through family correspondence and shared patronage of cultural institutions. Even without formal marriages, these royal women often acted as intermediaries, fostering goodwill between rival states. In later generations, the Hanoverians' descendants would marry into the royal families of Greece, Spain, and even Russia. The Greek royal family, through Queen Frederica, herself a Hanoverian princess, linked the line to both the Hellenic and Spanish thrones. Frederica's daughter, Queen Sophia of Spain, married King Juan Carlos, bringing Hanoverian heritage to one of the most prominent European monarchies of the modern era. These unions continued the tradition of political and cultural blending that had characterized the family for centuries. They also demonstrated how the Hanoverian legacy persisted long after their own kingdom had been erased from the map. Even without a throne, the family maintained relevance through their ability to connect nations at the highest social and political levels. Such connections, however, were not always peaceful. The interwoven relationships of European royalty often created conflicts of loyalty during times of war. The First World War, for example, saw cousins leading armies against each other. King George V of Britain, Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany, and Tsar Nicholas II of Russia were all related through the extended family networks that traced back to the Hanoverians and their contemporaries. The deep familial bonds that had once held Europe's royal houses together became sources of strain when nationalism and political alliances divided the continent. The same marriages that had been intended to secure peace instead revealed how fragile those ties could be when confronted by modern statecraft and warfare. The Hanoverian role in this complex web cannot be overstated. Their descendants served in various armies, acted as envoys, and navigated the treacherous political landscape of early 20th century Europe. Prince Ernest Augustus, who married Victoria Louise, found himself in a difficult position during the war, torn between his British ancestry and his loyalty to Germany. His marriage to the Kaiser's daughter placed him firmly within the German imperial circle, but his heritage linked him to Britain's royal family, who by then had changed their name to Windsor to distance themselves from German associations. The war thus turned family against family, and the Hanoverians, like many other royal houses, suffered the painful consequences of divided loyalties. Even after the wars, the influence of the Hanoverian bloodline persisted in quieter but meaningful ways. Many of their descendants became cultural patrons, supporting art, music, and education across Europe. They maintained estates in Germany and Austria, and participated in charitable organizations that preserved royal heritage and history. Through these efforts, the Hanoverians helped shape the cultural memory of Europe's aristocracy, ensuring that the legacy of monarchy continued to play a role even in democratic societies. Their ability to adapt to changing times while retaining a sense of identity reflected the same resilience that had defined their ancestors since the 18th century. The social connections forged through marriage also contributed to cultural exchange between nations. The union of Ernest Augustus and Victoria Louise, for instance, encouraged artistic collaborations and architectural developments inspired by both British and Prussian traditions. Their estates became centers of cultural activity, hosting gatherings that brought together artists, scholars, and political thinkers from across Europe. These interactions influenced not only the arts but also social customs and education, helping to modernize aristocratic life in the early 20th century. The Hanoverians, though no longer rulers, remained tastemakers and symbols of refinement in a rapidly changing world. In a broader sense, the Hanoverian marriages exemplified the paradox of royal diplomacy. By intertwining family lines across nations, they sought to prevent conflict through shared kinship, yet those same ties sometimes made wars more personal and tragic. The very interconnectedness of Europe's royal families meant that political disputes could not be separated from private relationships. When the First World War broke out, letters exchanged between cousins on opposing sides revealed the emotional toll of fighting against one's own family. The Hanoverians, with their heritage divided between Britain and Germany, embodied this contradiction more than most. Their story serves as a reminder that dynastic politics, though often driven by strategy, were also deeply human. As Europe moved into the modern age, the Hanoverians adapted once again. Their descendants participated in rebuilding efforts after the wars, working within cultural and humanitarian fields rather than seeking political restoration. Some became business leaders and philanthropists, while others continued to represent the family at ceremonial events and historical commemorations. The family's long survival, despite the loss of their kingdoms and titles, testifies to their ability to evolve while maintaining dignity and relevance. Their modern presence in European society illustrates how the legacy of monarchy can persist not through rule, but through continuity and example. The lasting influence of the Hanoverians can be seen in how European royal houses continue to reflect their values of duty, adaptability, and cultural openness. The marriage patterns they helped establish, linking Britain, Germany, Greece, Spain, and Scandinavia, created a foundation for cooperation and shared identity among modern monarchies. In this way, the Hanoverians' reach extended far beyond politics. They shaped the very notion of what it meant to be royal in a modern world. Not simply rulers by birthright, but figures of cultural and moral influence, representing unity in diversity. Their contribution to Europe's political and cultural fabric also shaped the environment that led to both the First and Second World Wars. The interconnectedness of royal families meant that European leaders often shared personal relationships, which could either ease tensions or complicate diplomacy. In the years leading up to the First World War, royal correspondence among cousins revealed both mutual affection and political misunderstanding. The Hanoverians were part of this intricate network, their own marriages symbolizing both reconciliation and rivalry. The marriage of Ernest Augustus and Victoria Louise, for instance, was meant to heal divisions between Hanover and Prussia, yet within a few years, it became a symbol of the unity that would be shattered by war. During the Second World War, the Hanoverians again found themselves in a delicate position. Some members of the family opposed the Nazi regime, while others were drawn into its orbit through the aristocratic circles that initially supported nationalist ideals. The complexity of their loyalties reflected the broader struggle of Europe's old nobility to define its place in a new and dangerous world. Despite the political upheaval, the Hanoverians managed to preserve much of their heritage, quietly protecting their estates and maintaining traditions that connected them to their past. In the post-war era, the family's influence took on a more social and cultural form. The Hanoverians became symbols of continuity, representing an unbroken link to Europe's royal history. They appeared at state occasions, supported charitable causes, and engaged in international diplomacy through soft influence rather than authority. Their marriages continued to bridge nations and cultures. When Princess Caroline of Hanover married Prince Ernest Augustus, it brought together not only two royal lines, but also two different worlds: the traditional German aristocracy and the modern glamour of Monaco. This union, though far removed from the political marriages of the past, carried the same spirit of connection that had defined the Hanoverians for centuries. The legacy of these unions is visible in Europe's royal families today. The descendants of the Hanoverians occupy prominent positions in several monarchies, their heritage acknowledged even when their titles are no longer official. They represent the enduring idea that history and bloodlines can transcend borders. Through their marriages and alliances, they helped create a Europe where royal families, though symbolic, serve as reminders of a shared past and a network of continuity. The Hanoverians' hidden heirs, those who did not rule but influenced through kinship, played a vital part in this evolution. In many ways, the Hanoverian dynasties reach across Europe shaped not just royal genealogy, but also the very structure of European identity. Their alliances linked Protestant and Catholic states, north and south, east and west, fostering cultural exchange even amid political rivalry. Their story is one of transformation, from kings and queens to ambassadors of heritage. While the crowns they once wore are now relics of history, the family's influence remains embedded in the institutions and traditions of modern monarchy. From Princess Augusta Sophia's quiet devotion in the 18th century to the grand marriage of Ernest Augustus and Victoria Louise, and onward to the modern figures who carry their name, the Hanoverian legacy has persisted through adaptation, connection, and resilience. They have lived through exile and war, glory and obscurity, yet their mark on Europe endures. Their hidden heirs and far-reaching marriages shaped the alliances and divisions that defined a continent. Their story is not just one of royal descent, but of the subtle, enduring power of kinship, an invisible thread that has bound Europe's monarchies together for generations, influencing the course of history in ways that remain visible even today. The long story of the House of Hanover, with its proud kings, defiant dukes, and cosmopolitan princes, did not end abruptly. Rather, it faded through a gradual process of political change, loss of sovereignty, and social transformation that swept across Europe in the 19th and 20th centuries. The Hanoverians, once rulers of both Britain and a German kingdom, found their fortunes reshaped by wars, revolutions, and the rise of nationalism. What had begun as a dynasty of immense political reach became a network of aristocratic families bound more by heritage than by power. As the world moved toward democracy and modernity, the Hanoverians adapted, some quietly and some reluctantly, to a life where royal authority was no longer measured in land or armies, but in tradition and name. Their story of decline, displacement, and endurance mirrors the fate of monarchy itself in modern Europe. The fall of the Kingdom of Hanover in the year 1866 was the first major blow to the family's political influence. After King George V of Hanover sided with Austria in the war against Prussia, his kingdom was swiftly annexed by the victorious Prussians. Hanover ceased to exist as an independent state, and its royal family went into exile. This event did not only end a reign, but also signaled a broader shift in European power. The rise of Prussia under Otto von Bismarck and the subsequent unification of Germany left little room for small sovereign monarchies. The Hanoverians, who had ruled their domain for more than a century and a half, were now dispossessed but not defeated. George V continued to claim his title and maintain a court in exile, determined to preserve his family's dignity and their right to the throne. Yet from that point onward, their power was symbolic, their authority rooted in memory rather than rule. After George's death, his son, Ernest Augustus, inherited both the family's wealth and its lost claim. He became the Duke of Cumberland and Teviotdale, a title recognized in Britain, though it carried no political power after the separation of the British and Hanoverian crowns. Ernest Augustus was a man of principle and pride, but he could not reverse the tide of history. The Prussian government confiscated the family's Hanoverian estates, viewing them as a potential threat to the new order. The Hanoverians sued for the return of their property, and although they eventually regained much of their wealth, they would never again possess a sovereign state. Instead, they joined the ranks of Europe's great aristocracy, families of illustrious heritage but limited political relevance. Despite their loss, the Hanoverians remained deeply respected within royal circles. Their lineage connected them to the British royal family, the Prussian court, and numerous European dynasties. This web of relations allowed them to maintain influence through social and marital alliances. Yet, as the 19th century drew to a close, the political role of royalty across Europe continued to shrink. The rise of constitutional governments meant that monarchs, even in powerful nations, ruled with diminishing authority. For exiled or dispossessed royal families like the Hanoverians, survival depended on adaptability. They preserved their status through wealth, culture, and marriage rather than sovereignty. One of the most significant steps in this adaptation came with the marriage between Ernest Augustus, Duke of Brunswick, and Princess Victoria Louise of Prussia in the early 20th century. This union represented not only a reconciliation between the Hanoverians and the Hohenzollerns, who had once been enemies, but also a recognition of the new political reality. The Duke of Brunswick title, granted by the German Emperor to Ernest Augustus, partially restored the family's position within the German aristocracy. For a brief time, it seemed as if the Hanoverians might find a new role within the imperial structure. Ernest Augustus served as a respected military officer and provincial ruler under the German Empire, and his wife, Victoria Louise, became one of the most admired princesses in Europe. Their reign in Brunswick was short-lived, however. The outbreak of the First World War and the fall of the German monarchies in its aftermath swept away the remnants of their restored power. When the German Empire collapsed in 1918, the Hanoverians, like all German royal families, lost their official titles and political privileges. The newly formed Weimar Republic abolished hereditary monarchies, confiscated some properties, and stripped nobility of their formal powers. Though the Hanoverians were allowed to keep their estates, their status became purely social. Ernest Augustus and Victoria Louise adjusted to private life, managing their properties and maintaining ceremonial roles in aristocratic society. Their descendants grew up in a world where being royal meant upholding a family name rather than exercising authority. This transition from rulers to private citizens was both humbling and liberating. It allowed the Hanoverians to redefine their identity around cultural, charitable, and social contributions rather than political ambition. The loss of power, however, did not mean the disappearance of the Hanoverian presence. Ernest Augustus and Victoria Louise's children and grandchildren continued to marry into Europe's leading royal families, extending their legacy across borders. Their son, also named Ernest Augustus, inherited the family's estates and became the head of the House of Hanover in the mid-20th century. Although he held no official title recognized by law, he was still addressed socially as Prince of Hanover and Duke of Brunswick. His marriage to Princess Ortrud of Schleswig-Holstein further tied the family to Northern Europe's noble networks. Through such alliances, the Hanoverians maintained a distinct identity within the broader landscape of European aristocracy, even as monarchies across the continent were redefined or abolished. During the turbulent years of the Second World War, the Hanoverians once again faced challenges of loyalty and identity. Their German citizenship and aristocratic connections placed them in a difficult position, especially given their ancestral ties to Britain. Some family members opposed the Nazi regime, while others tried to remain neutral to protect their estates and heritage. The war left deep scars on the family, as it did on much of Europe, but they survived the upheaval with their dignity intact. After the war, the Hanoverians found themselves living in a changed Germany, one where nobility held no formal privileges but continued to play a social and cultural role. They became known less as political figures and more as custodians of history, preserving the traditions and estates that had once symbolized royal authority. The modern head of the family, Prince Ernest Augustus of Hanover, embodies this transformation. Born in the mid-20th century, He inherited not a kingdom, but a name that carries centuries of history. He is recognized as the head of the House of Hanover, though his titles are historical rather than official. His life reflects the delicate balance between heritage and modernity that defines many of Europe's remaining noble families. Known for his business interests and occasionally turbulent personal life, he has continued to represent the Hanoverian legacy at public and private events. His marriage to Princess Caroline of Monaco, daughter of Prince Rainier and Grace Kelly, in the late 20th century, brought renewed attention to the family and symbolized yet another link between traditional European aristocracy and modern high society. Prince Ernest Augustus's children, including Prince Christian of Hanover, represent a new generation of Hanoverians who live not as monarchs, but as figures of culture, philanthropy, and international identity. Prince Christian, educated in both Europe and Latin America, has embraced a cosmopolitan lifestyle that reflects the global reach of modern royalty. His marriage to Alexandra de Osma, a Peruvian lawyer and designer, shows how far the Hanoverian legacy has traveled from its roots in northern Germany. The family's connections now span continents, merging aristocratic tradition with contemporary life. Though they no longer rule, the Hanoverians remain part of the living history of European nobility, their influence felt in the quiet continuity of name, heritage, and reputation. The reasons for the decline of the Hanoverian branches are varied but intertwined. The political changes of the 19th century, particularly the unification of Germany under Prussian dominance, ended their sovereignty. The ideological shifts of the 20th century, liberalism, nationalism, and republicanism, erased the last remnants of royal privilege. At the same time, the social structure that had supported monarchy evolved. The old aristocratic networks that once sustained dynasties through arranged marriages and land ownership gave way to a world where merit and economy mattered more than bloodlines. For many Hanoverian descendants, this meant adapting to new professions, managing family businesses, or engaging in public service. Some emigrated to other countries, while others quietly integrated into German society, maintaining their heritage privately rather than publicly. One of the enduring characteristics of the Hanoverian family is their ability to preserve dignity through change. Even when stripped of titles and power, they maintained a sense of continuity that came from understanding their place in history. Their estates, such as Marienburg Castle and Herrenhausen, stand as symbols of this enduring heritage. Though some properties have been sold or converted into museums, they remain physical reminders of a royal past that shaped European history. The family has also played an active role in preserving historical archives and supporting cultural initiatives, ensuring that their contribution to Europe's development is not forgotten. The merging and fading of the Hanoverian branches also reflect the natural evolution of royal families over centuries. As generations pass and new marriages form, distinct lines blend into broader European dynastic networks. The descendants of the Hanoverians today are scattered across multiple royal and noble houses, from Spain and Greece to Austria and Monaco. Their shared ancestry unites them in heritage, even as their roles differ widely. Some continue to use their historic titles socially, while others prefer private lives away from the public eye. What unites them all is the enduring legacy of the Hanoverian spirit, pragmatic, proud, and resilient. Although their political power disappeared long ago, the Hanoverians remain an essential part of understanding how monarchy adapted to the modern world. Their journey from rulers of Britain and Hanover to private citizens of Europe illustrates the broader transition from absolute monarchy to constitutional and finally symbolic forms of kingship. The lessons of their history reveal that monarchy survives not through conquest, but through relevance. The Hanoverians managed to endure by redefining themselves in each era, finding purpose beyond the throne. They embraced education, art, and social responsibility as new forms of leadership, reflecting the changing values of the societies around them. Prince Christian of Hanover, like many of his contemporaries in other royal families, represents the latest stage of this evolution. His life, grounded in global culture and modern professions, shows how the heirs of once great dynasties continue to influence through example rather than power. His involvement in charitable and cultural projects demonstrates the enduring Hanoverian belief in service and public engagement, even without official authority. The shift from sovereign rulers to symbolic figures has not erased their significance. Rather, it has transformed it into something more compatible with modern ideals of equality and democracy. In reflecting on the decline of the Hanoverian branches, it becomes clear that their story is not one of failure, but of adaptation. The annexation of their kingdom, the loss of titles, and the fading of political influence were all part of the broader transformation of Europe. Yet through these changes, the Hanoverians maintained their sense of identity and continuity. They evolved from kings and queens to cultural stewards, preserving history while living within the present. Their journey from the grandeur of George I's succession to the quiet dignity of Prince Christian's modern role captures the full arc of royal evolution, from power to symbolism, from governance to heritage. The disappearance of the Hanoverian branches as sovereign rulers marks not an end, but a transformation. The family remains alive, its name respected, its story remembered. Their legacy is woven into the very fabric of Europe's royal and cultural history. From the palaces of Hanover to the modern streets of Monaco, from the courts of Britain to the cultural foundations of Germany, the descendants of Ernest Augustus continue to carry the memory of a dynasty that once shaped nations. Their decline mirrors the fading of old monarchies across Europe, yet their endurance proves that history's influence cannot be measured only by crowns or thrones. It lives on in the names, traditions, and quiet acts of those who, even without kingdoms, remain part of a lineage that helped define the meaning of royalty. The story of the House of Hanover does not simply belong to the past. It continues to shape the present, even if the symbols of that influence are less visible than crowns or thrones. What began as a political dynasty that ruled over Britain and Hanover evolved into a family whose significance lies in continuity, adaptation, and identity. Their legacy is more than a list of monarchs and noble titles. It is a reflection of how families adapt to history rather than control it. The lives of their descendants, from Ernest Augustus to Prince Christian and Princess Alexandra, demonstrate that heritage can thrive without power and that history's echoes can still influence modern Europe in subtle yet lasting ways. The Hanoverians remind us that monarchy, stripped of its political authority, can still play a role in shaping culture, memory, and meaning. To understand why their stories still matter today, one must first see how the Hanoverians redefined their purpose after losing sovereignty. When the Kingdom of Hanover was annexed and their rule ended, the family could have faded into obscurity. Instead, they preserved their history with remarkable discipline. They maintained their estates, upheld their traditions, and continued to participate in public life in ways that reflected service rather than domination. Their focus shifted from politics to culture, education, and philanthropy. This evolution allowed them to remain relevant in changing times, not as rulers, but as figures who connected the modern world to its historical roots. The preservation of Marienburg Castle, for instance, and the efforts to restore its archives reflect a broader understanding of legacy as stewardship. These actions are not about holding power, but about protecting identity. The Hanoverian descendants of today operate in a world where monarchy is largely ceremonial, yet their presence continues to inspire interest. Prince Christian of Hanover, for example, represents a blend of old-world nobility and contemporary internationalism. He moves through a global landscape shaped by media, diplomacy, and social engagement, and his image reflects the changing nature of royal identity. His marriage to Alexandra de Osma united European aristocracy with South American heritage, a symbol of how tradition and modernity can coexist. Princess Alexandra of Hanover, known for her education, poise, and involvement in cultural circles, represents another side of this evolution. She participates in public life with a balance of discretion and accessibility, demonstrating how the younger generation of royals can maintain tradition while adapting to contemporary expectations of individuality and public responsibility. These modern figures carry the Hanoverian name into a world that values legacy differently. In the past, lineage defined authority. Today, it offers a bridge to history. The Hanoverians no longer govern, but their story continues to shape regional and cultural identity. In northern Germany, for example, their historical influence remains evident in the architecture, art, and institutions that bear their mark. The legacy of the royal gardens at Herrenhausen, once the pride of the Hanoverian court, continues to attract visitors and scholars interested in the intersection of art, politics, and nature. Similarly, Marienburg Castle, once a royal residence, now serves as a reminder of the family's contribution to European history. Even though it is partly privately owned and partly open to the public, it functions as a living museum of a time when royal taste shaped cultural direction. The Hanoverian significance also lies in the way their story connects with broader European narratives. Their history intersects with those of Britain, Prussia, and the German Empire, each transition reflecting a key moment in the development of modern Europe. The dynasty's ties to Britain, through the line that produced George I and his successors, highlight the long-standing relationship between the two nations. Their later involvement in German and Prussian politics reveals the complex web of alliances and rivalries that shaped continental history. By tracing these connections, we gain insight into the way dynastic families influenced international relations long after their thrones disappeared. Even today, their descendants serve as informal ambassadors of history, representing the continuity of cultural bonds that transcend political boundaries. In the context of 21st-century Europe, where questions of identity, heritage, and unity are ever more relevant, the Hanoverian legacy offers perspective. Their story demonstrates that heritage is not merely about nostalgia. It is about the ability to integrate history into the present. The family's survival through wars, revolutions, and social upheavals speaks to resilience and adaptability. They transformed loss into legacy, using memory as a means of continuity. This approach mirrors the way modern societies seek to balance progress with tradition. The Hanoverians' ability to evolve without abandoning their past serves as a metaphor for how nations, too, can move forward while honoring their roots. The idea of the hidden heirs within the Hanoverian family highlights another important dimension of their legacy. History often focuses on the most visible figures, the kings, queens, and prominent princes, while overlooking the many branches that contributed quietly to the family's endurance. These lesser-known descendants, who married into regional nobility or pursued private lives, helped preserve the Hanoverian spirit in ways that were no less meaningful. Their choices, though not widely recorded, shaped the family's adaptation to modern realities. By examining these overlooked stories, we gain a fuller understanding of what monarchy means when stripped of its political trappings. It becomes a study of character, values, and continuity rather than mere governance. For instance, after the fall of the Kingdom of Hanover, many members of the family continued to influence local communities through charitable work, education, and preservation of heritage. Their engagement in civic life helped bridge the gap between aristocracy and common society, demonstrating that nobility could still play a constructive role. Even today, Hanoverian descendants participate in cultural foundations, historical societies, and humanitarian efforts across Europe. Their involvement underscores that royal heritage, when reimagined, can serve a public purpose. This shift from ruling to serving aligns with the broader transformation of monarchy in the modern era, where symbolic presence often carries more influence than formal power. In Britain, the Hanoverian legacy remains deeply ingrained, even though the family no longer rules there directly. The early Hanoverian kings laid the groundwork for constitutional monarchy, setting a precedent for the balance of tradition and democracy that defines the British system today. George I and George II established the political stability that allowed Parliament to strengthen its role, while George III's long reign witnessed the emergence of modern British identity. The echoes of their policies and personalities continue to shape the British monarchy's relationship with the public. By understanding the Hanoverians, we understand how monarchy evolved into an institution that values continuity over control. The European influence of the Hanoverians also extends into cultural and artistic domains. Their patronage of music, architecture, and philosophy in the 18th and 19th centuries contributed to a flourishing of ideas that continue to resonate. Composers like Handel found support and recognition under Hanoverian patronage, producing works that remain central to European culture. The architectural heritage of Hanoverian estates and palaces continues to inform restoration practices and inspire historical scholarship. These contributions remind us that royal influence is not only measured by political achievements, but also by the cultural foundations it leaves behind. In modern times, the Hanoverian descendants' engagement with contemporary issues adds a new layer to their relevance. Many have embraced global perspectives, reflecting the interconnected nature of today's world. Prince Christian's work in international business and cultural ventures, for instance, demonstrates how heritage can coexist with modern enterprise. Princess Alexandra's involvement in public appearances and her connection to both German and Monegasque circles show how the idea of royalty has evolved into a form of soft diplomacy. Through these roles, the Hanoverians continue to embody values of service, continuity, and representation that resonate in a world often seeking stability and tradition amid rapid change. Their presence also contributes to a broader dialogue about the meaning of monarchy in a democratic age. While absolute monarchy has vanished from most of Europe, the symbolic and cultural roles of royal families persist. The Hanoverians illustrate that these roles can evolve without losing authenticity. They demonstrate that the legacy of royalty is not dependent on political control, but on the ability to connect the past to the present. Their continued relevance lies in how they represent history as a living narrative, one that adapts to modern contexts while preserving the lessons of earlier generations. This ongoing transformation challenges the notion that monarchy is a relic. Instead, it shows how tradition can find new forms of expression. The Hanoverian story also serves as a mirror to broader human themes: resilience, adaptation, and the passage of time. It shows how families, like nations, must confront change and redefine themselves to survive. Their journey from power to preservation offers insights into the nature of legacy itself. True legacy is not about permanence of position, but about the endurance of values and memory. The Hanoverians' survival, despite losing their kingdom and formal titles, is a testament to the strength of identity built on more than authority. It reflects a universal truth. History belongs not only to those who win wars or rule empires, but also to those who endure with purpose. In today's Europe, where debates about heritage and identity shape political and cultural life, the Hanoverian example provides a grounding perspective. Their history invites reflection on how tradition can coexist with progress, how old institutions can adapt without losing integrity. The family's modern role, though largely symbolic, still contributes to the ongoing conversation about what it means to belong to a shared European history. Their preservation of castles, archives, and art collections enriches public understanding of the past. Their participation in charitable and cultural endeavors shows that legacy can evolve into service. In this sense, their story speaks to the enduring relevance of history as a guide for navigating the present. The Hanoverians also remind us that history is often incomplete. Many of their branches remain underexplored, their contributions hidden beneath the grandeur of better-known monarchs. The lives of lesser-known princes, duchesses, and descendants reveal the personal side of history, stories of exile, adaptation, and quiet resilience. These narratives, though less dramatic than wars or revolutions, carry their own significance. They illustrate how individuals shaped by great events find ways to live meaningfully beyond them. Recovering these stories helps us understand history not as a series of dates and rulers, but as a web of lives connected by time and circumstance. As of November 2025, the Hanoverian family continues to represent this blend of heritage and modern identity. Their public appearances at cultural events, their participation in international initiatives, and their visibility in global media keep their name alive. Yet what truly sustains their relevance is not fame but continuity. They embody a form of history that adapts without breaking, maintaining a line that began centuries ago in the courts of northern Germany and on the throne of Britain. Their existence serves as a reminder that the legacies of old dynasties still shape the cultural and historical consciousness of Europe. They stand as living links to a past that continues to inform the present. Their story invites us to reconsider how we view monarchy and history. It challenges the idea that only reigning houses matter, showing that influence persists in many forms. The Hanoverians' transition from rulers to stewards of heritage demonstrates that loss can lead to renewal. Their quiet endurance, their commitment to preserving culture and identity, offers a model for how individuals and societies can face change without losing themselves. By examining their journey, we gain insight into the broader processes of transformation that define modern history. The Hanoverian legacy is not confined to palaces or archives. It lives in the ways their descendants engage with the world, the institutions they support, and the stories they carry forward. Their evolution from royal authority to cultural relevance reveals a deeper truth about history itself. It is never static. It changes with those who remember it, reinterpret it, and live it. The House of Hanover, through its many branches and transformations, embodies this ongoing dialogue between past and present. As we look at their legacy today, one cannot help but wonder what other forgotten lines of history remain hidden, waiting to be rediscovered. The Hanoverians' lesser-known branches remind us that the great narratives of history are often incomplete, shaped by the focus on power rather than people. There are countless stories of resilience, adaptation, and quiet influence buried in archives and family records across Europe. Each one adds depth to our understanding of how history unfolds. Perhaps the greatest lesson from the Hanoverians is that even when crowns are lost and thrones disappear, the essence of legacy endures. Their story encourages us to look beyond the surface of history and to seek out the human experiences that give it meaning. What other untold lives, hidden in the shadows of great dynasties, still wait to remind us that history's true power lies not in glory, but in endurance?